right, we're ready. Are you ready, Steve? All right. All right, good evening, everyone. Oh, come on now. There you go. I know you're out there. I was talking to a few of you. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Kansas City Public Library, our Plaza branch. We are proud to have you all. And I'm going to start by saying my name because I always forget. My name is Abby Yellman. I'm the Director and Chief Executive of the Kansas City Public Library. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I also want to say real quickly, thank you to my staff. There's multiple of them running around everywhere to make sure that tonight goes well as our staff working upstairs. So if you see them, want to give them a high five or something, please do. They do great work. So we're so glad that you've joined us here tonight for this important conversation about redistricting, a topic that lies at the very heart of civic representation and community voice. Our library believes deeply in our responsibility to serve as a trusted resource in a world overflowing with information. Every day we strive to provide spaces and opportunities where knowledge can be shared and where dialogue and understanding can thrive. We believe our differences are opportunities to listen, to learn, to speak, and to grow together as a community. Programs like tonight's reflect our ongoing commitment to bring together informed voices in an active, engaged community, so thank you for that, which we know is the foundation of a healthy democracy. Every voice in Kansas City matters. Every voice matters, so thank you for being here. We are proud to partner with KCUR, whose collaboration and partnership helps our library bring programs like this to our community. This evening's program will explore what's happening right now in redistricting while also providing valuable historical context for how district boundaries can shape communities. Our panelists will share insights into how these changes in district lines can influence everything from representation to allocation of resources. And this is my 18-point font, so I can actually read it, so I apologize. And how those shifts can impact daily life across our neighborhoods, our city, and our state. We hope everyone will leave here tonight with a clearer picture of how policy decisions are made and how these decisions ripple through the places that we all call home. This conversation is about knowledge, awareness, and participation, things that empower all of us to engage thoughtfully in civic life. We invite everyone to approach tonight's program with curiosity and openness, recognizing that complex issues can evoke a range of perspectives and differing viewpoints, and that respectful dialogue lies at the heart of our democracy. Join me tonight as we continue to model here in Kansas City. I've been very proud as we've done a lot of these programs as of late. We've done a lot of programs for years, but very proud of Kansas City for the kind, thoughtful, and civil conversation that has occurred. And it is the kind that strengthens our community and our connections to one another. So without further ado, it is my pleasure that I say my only claim to fame here in Kansas City, being back about a year and a half, is that I have been on this man's show twice. And I'm proud of it, right? That's right. So it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Kraske, host of KCUR's Up to Date, who will introduce and lead tonight's outstanding lineup of panelists that are with us. Thank you, panelists, for being here. Please join me in welcoming Steve Kraske.
Thanks, Abby. Appreciate it. Thank you all very much, and you can rest assured if Abby wasn't good the first time, she never would have been on the second time. That's how we work on Up to Date. Hey, thank you all for being here, and thank you to our live stream audience. We have a number of folks listening online as well. Thank you to the Public Library for your great hospitality here. Always appreciated. And thanks to Jen Lynn, Jen Listen, our KCUR's Young Persons Group, for helping to collaborate and put this event together. The cool news is you've got to behave here tonight because we're going to edit this presentation and air it on Up to Date sometime in the next few days to come. So just keep that in mind. Behave yourselves here tonight if you can. And before I forget to say this, we have a terrific panel here tonight, which you're about to find out. My colleague, my longtime colleague at KCUR, Laura Ziegler, put this panel together. Let's give it up for Laura Ziegler for all she did to get this thing together here. So I've got directions and instructions I've got to read. So here we go. I'm going to make a few brief opening remarks, and I'm going to introduce our panel. Then we'll dive into your questions, and I hope you have a lot of them here this evening. Some have been submitted in advance. Others will get from our live stream tonight, and we'll feed those in as we go through the evening here. Again, KCUR staffers and our young Gen Listen friends will be in the aisles here to collect those questions as we go along. Those of you who are collecting questions, raise your hand so you know who you're going to be looking for. If you look around, you'll see that's who's going to be helping you. I'll rotate asking questions from our different sources. Unfortunately, I can tell you right now, we won't get to every single question, but I think we'll get to a lot of them. And of course, this topic is so important. We're in the midst of it right now in both our states, so the topic could not be any more relevant than it is. Please, no shouting questions from the floor, no speeches. Feel free to, but we want to be informative and have a civil conversation, so please, obviously, be respectful. Remember, again, we're recording tonight's event, so it's the questions and answers that we're more interested in hearing. Okay? We all square on that? Okay, good deal. Well, let's get started. Welcome to Up to Date on KCUR 89.3. I'm Steve Kraske. We're coming to you from the Kansas City Public Library Plaza branch with a community question and answer forum about the critical topic of redistricting. We're partnering with the Kansas City Public Library and KCUR's Young Friends group, that's Gen Listen, to provide a panel of experts and two distinguished reporters from KCUR who have been covering this issue for months to provide information on this critical issue. First, some introductions. We're grateful to have with us Edward Greim. He's a partner with the law firm Graves Garrett Greim here in Kansas City. His practice focuses on complex commercial litigation, free speech, and election law. And you should know that Mr. Greim earlier this month argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in a Louisiana redistricting case, defending a lower court ruling on a case involving alleged racial gerrymandering. In 2012, he defended Missouri's last congressional maps against a challenge that they weren't sufficiently compact. And joining us also is Dr. Samuel Wang. He's a professor of neuroscience at Princeton University. That's right, I said neuroscience. He also directs the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, which has a mission of developing standards for evaluating district maps using nonpartisan standards of fairness. He has served as an outside election expert to state courts, governments, and citizen commissions in North Carolina, New Jersey, and Maine. In 2023, he founded the Electoral Innovation Lab, whose mission is to create a practical science of democracy repair. I don't usually ask questions during introductions, but Dr. Wang, help me here. Neuroscience and gerrymandering. How does that work?
Well,
You work.
I'm pretty statistically minded. Neuroscience has gone in that direction. And you know, neuroscience is, of course, how single brains make decisions, but ultimately elections are how groups of people make decisions. And the rules are complicated and well-suited for a systems biologist. So, you know, and also as a citizen, I care very much about our country. And it's the thing I bring to the party.
What I take from that is you're not a right brain or a left brain guy, you're a whole brain guy, and we're going to leave it at that, okay? Also want to introduce KCUR Savannah Hawley Bates, our Missouri politics and government reporter, and Zane Irwin, a political reporter with the Kansas News Service. This would be a nice time to give them a round of applause for being here tonight. Okay, let's jump into our conversation here. Savannah, let's start with you. Briefly set the stage for us in Missouri. This isn't the first time that Congressman Cleaver's district has been redrawn, right? Tell us about that.
So this is not the first time that Cleaver's district has been redrawn. He's been in office since 2005. In the past, they've expanded the district out a little on I-70, made it a bit more rural, changed it again. But in general, it's been sort of this circle around the metro. This is the first time that the map has been changed so drastically and specifically to target Cleaver's seat. They attempted this sort of 7-to-1 map, 7 Republican, 1 Democrat over in St. Louis back in 2022. And a lot of Republicans didn't want to go through with it because they were concerned that it could actually make it more competitive and make it a sort of 5-to-3 map, 5 Republican and 3 Democrats. Then that same sort of map, that 7-to-1 map, is what was resurrected this year in the special session and passed by the legislature.
It's not lost on me that Missouri has become the second state in the country to go through this redistricting process. How did that happen?
So there's multiple different ways that has happened. I think, Texas being the first state in general, if you follow politics in Missouri, Missouri follows Texas on a lot of legislative issues. This was also led by Trump. He made a lot of calls. He said this from the outset, that he wanted Republican states to redistrict to make the midterm safer for Republicans and to sort of keep the House safe for Trump, or keep it Republican. After Texas redistricted their state, it was still up in the air. Governor Mike Kehoe had said he'd be open to redistricting, but nothing had been called quite yet. And then there was this sort of instance where Trump called Kehoe and also spoke to legislators through Kehoe's phone. The special session was called shortly after that. Trump, I'm sure if you've been reading our coverage, you saw it, had this Truth Social tweet that sort of said, like, the great state of Missouri is in. And so a lot of Republicans in the legislature have said, yes, we didn't do this in 2022, but the time is right now, because we don't want to see Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House. We want Mike Johnson to remain Speaker of the House, make, again, the midterm safer for Republicans. And the legislators said that Trump's sort of endorsement on this redistricting had helped sort of bind the Republicans together. Wasn't completely unanimous. 15 Republicans voted against the new maps in both the House and Senate during the special session, but largely it was supported by Republicans across the state.
Okay, so Missouri has not only had a special session, but it's redrawn its map already. Zane Irwin from the Kansas News Service, one big question in your state is there even going to be a special session? Are they going to attempt to redraw the maps? Where does all that stand?
Yeah, I'm sure some Kansas Republicans are looking across the border, trying to play catch up, I suppose. So where we're at right now is that there are some Republican members of the Kansas House, the state House, that are holdouts. They oppose redistricting right now for whatever reason. And I'm certain that there are some calls being made and some convincing that's happening from legislative leaders to try and get those next few on board. And in order to redraw the map, they need to call a special session like Missouri did. Usually the governor does that, but I don't know if you know, but there's a Democratic governor in Kansas, Laura Kelly. Who are my Kansas folks here? Can you raise your hands? Okay, all right. Yeah, the redistricting line, if they're going to do it, if they get the special session, convince those state house members, and then if they go to the special session on November 7th, which is their target date, and then if they convince 2/3 of the state house and the state senate, which are Republican controlled, but again, there are some Republicans against this in the state legislature, then they might be able to do what Missouri and Texas have done and pass that map.
Sometimes reporters get a sense of what's going to happen, which is always treacherous, I know, but do you have a sense, are they going to have a special session?
I can tell you that they're running out of time. November 7th is a little ways away, less than 2 weeks. I looked at the state statute and I asked somebody that studies redistricting or special sessions rather, and it doesn't seem like there's a deadline. It doesn't seem like they have to sign their petition X number of days before the actual session starts. But I imagine once we get to November 6th, they're not going to say, surprise, we got all the votes. So in the coming days, I'm glued to my phone trying to figure out if they're going to find the votes or if they're going to say, oh, we'll kick it down to the regular session in January.
Okay, well, let me go to Dr. Wang and Ed Grimes here with a question that a lot of you have been asking us. Historically, how big of a deal is this redistricting business? And, how does redistricting shape communities in the context of the debates we're seeing today? Dr. Wang, go first, if you would.
Yeah, so districting is a funny business. It goes back to English times and the first parliaments in a system where we elect Congress critters to represent us in Washington, we expect one person to represent our interests. And what that means is that these lines make all the difference. And that's quite a big deal. In the last 50 years or so, there's been a principle of one person, one vote, where districts have to be of equal population. And that's developed, with it has developed a tradition of keeping district lines the same for a whole decade. So these district lines have to do the jobs of representing cities, counties, communities, racial groups, at least for now, under the Voting Rights Act as it's currently interpreted. But occasionally, legislatures decide to do it on their own. In the last 50 years, it's happened twice. The first was Texas in 2003. Second was Georgia in 2006. Other times, it's been enforced by a court. And this year has been what Paul Smith of the Campaign Legal Center has called a festival of gerrymandering. And so Texas went first, then Missouri, of course. If you follow politics, you know that California is going to do it. Indiana seems to be maybe waffling.
Right.
Ohio cut a deal. So there's a few that are hanging back a little bit, but we've already doubled the number of mid-decade redistricting events in the last decade, and that's a big deal. Now,
Has the country ever seen anything quite like this before?
first Gilded Age. So after the Civil War, there was a period of closely divided government. We think of it as a time of corruption. We think of it as a time of moving backwards on civil rights, right? So Reconstruction kind of got dialed back quite dramatically. But it was also a time when power went back and forth a lot.
Right.
And legislatures actually redistricted quite a lot, kind of on a whim. And it was a time when that power played a dominant role in what people wanted, what voters wanted, what Black voters wanted, played a much smaller role. So the aggressive deployment of redistricting can make all the difference in a representative democracy.
Ed Greim, how important do you see redistricting? What's redistricting's role in terms of how it shapes communities?
Well, I am not sure how much of a feedback effect that redistricting has on communities. I guess as a litigator and not as a social scientist, I'm usually dealing with arguments about whether the districts that are drawn or that somebody wants to be drawn accurately bring together what's called communities of interest. But and so that's sort of, that's the causation flowing one way from what are our existing communities and now what will we try to draw to reflect those. But if I understand the question, it's really posing a different scenario, which is that the lines themselves will impact the lives of people living there. And I have to say, I mean, different states are different and congressional districts may be different from legislative districts, which might be different from, even some states have Supreme Court districts or judicial districts. I don't think in Kansas City, I don't think you hear a lot about people referring to, I'm a longtime 6th district resident. I'm a longtime 4th district. They don't view it that way. And one problem is that Missouri and Kansas have both been whittled down in terms of their congressional representation in Congress. And I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think at one point, Missouri, we were the 5th most populous state in the nation at one time. We had 18 seats. Wow. And so we've been losing seats for a long, long time. And when you keep paring down, you've got to redraw those districts quite a bit. And then within a state, you often have uneven growth. And by the way, I don't want to leave Kansas. I saw those hands go up for Kansas. I think Kansas had 8 seats at one time, 8. And so they've had to whittle down too, but it's the rural depopulation. So now we have a district that goes all the way from St. Joe all the way to Hannibal. We have suburban KC and suburban St. Louis in one district because in between them, it's been depopulated. And so my point is this, it's that a lot of times the lines do change quite a bit. And it's because of growth, uneven growth in the state, and because the state falls behind, you have to start cutting districts. And so I guess my tentative hypothesis is that at least for congressional districts, the drawing of lines does not really form our community. Rather, we usually try to draw those lines to reflect some sense of community, because then you elect one person to take their interest to Washington.
Dr. Wang, you wanted to hop in here.
Yeah, so as Mr. Greim says, the issue of community is quite important, but one principle is finding ways to represent that community. So as I think many people in this room know, Kansas City, the largest city in Missouri, for a long time has been in one single district. But right now we're sitting in the new 4th district. If you know your food, this is a place where Jack Stack and Q39 are, okay? And we are now in a district that's shared with a town that I've never been to called Lebanon, which is about 150 miles east of here. Now, if you go 10 minutes east of here, it's actually 11 minutes by Google Maps. Not that I was checking the hours of Arthur Bryant, but Arthur Bryant is in the same district as Jefferson City. And if you go there, that's 150 miles and then 30 more miles to some small town. I've forgotten the name of it, unfortunately. But now we're talking about a community, I think the city of Kansas City, which has been basically split down the middle. And so I think there's a balancing act that goes on. And what used to be was that Mr. Emanuel Cleaver has represented this city, Kansas City, Missouri, for 20 years. And now what we have is Kansas City, KCMO, split down the middle. And, I guess it's probably good for the culinary lives of people in Lebanon, Missouri, to be in the same district as Q39. So, but, I think community is a big deal. And I think I agree with the idea that one should attend to lines as a way of representing communities.
Eddie, do you want to hop in here? I mean, what about that? I mean, that's one of the reasons everyone's here tonight, is this concern over this, what seems weird to a lot of people, that, we're going to be in the same, many people in Kansas City will now be in the same district as folks, hundreds of miles away.
I don't know if we got all the way to hundreds. We might have, but here's a fact that we often miss. So Kansas City, when we say it used to always be in one district, well, something approaching half of the population of Kansas City is north of the river in Clay and Platte County. I mean, I live south of the river, very, very close to this library. But, if I go to see my family up in Excelsior Springs, I'm driving through Kansas City for a good part of the way to get to Excelsior, because, of course, we annexed all that land up there. The population of Kansas City south of the river down here, I don't even think Kansas City has half of the population of Jackson County. Or if we do, it's not much more than that. There's a lot of population in eastern Jackson County, Independence, and other cities around us. The other thing is the ideal population of a district has grown over time. It's now something like 750,000. I don't know what it will be in 2030, but we can't. Kansas City has gotten smaller south of the river. What we need for a district has gotten bigger. And in fact, under in the 2012 map, which I defended in the Missouri Supreme Court, that was the first map that started in Kansas City and had people in Saline County, far away. I mean, they've got decent barbecue in Saline County and even in Lebanon. But we went very far there, and that district was really drawn to protect Cleaver. There were people in Ray County, Missouri, which I know pretty well. And they were mixed in with the middle of Kansas City. So we've been having to do this for a couple of cycles now. This is not a brand new thing. And the same thing for St. Louis. I mean, they've got people living very close in, connected with all the way out to mid-Missouri with the 3rd district. It's just what happens when the ideal size of districts has to grow, but we are losing people other than in our suburbs.
Well, as Zane was saying a little bit ago, we don't know at this point whether Kansas is going to go ahead and do a special session and redraw maps or not. But if it does, one thing that will probably happen, almost for sure, are lawsuits. They will follow in due course. There are a number of legal challenges already in Missouri from voters who question essentially two things here. You just heard the conversation over this idea of compactness, this idea that voters in an urban district have little in common with folks in the outstate portion. The other question on the line right now already is whether a new congressional map can be drawn mid-decade between the U.S. Census that occurs every 10 years, which of course is what's happening now in Missouri. And a number of you have already submitted questions, I'm told. How will the legal challenges to redistricting in Missouri stand up? What does this look like going forward based, Dr. Wang, on what you know right now about the legal challenges that follow in cases like this?
Well, I should say that I'm not involved in any way in those cases. At the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, we grade the maps according to nonpartisan standards. Then, of course, state law plays a very important role. My understanding of the multiple lawsuits that have been brought are that they, in large part, hinge on a provision in the Missouri Constitution that says that maps shall be drawn after the census. And the argument goes, and I think the precedent is a case called Pearson, if I remember correctly. The argument goes that that means that they should not be redrawn at other times. And as a contrast, the litigants say, well, look, the law also says that legislative districts can be drawn and can be redrawn mid-decade from time to time. And the idea is that if the Missouri Constitution says that something shall be done at the beginning of the decade and allows it throughout the decade for legislative districts, then the implication is that it doesn't allow it in the middle of the decade for congressional districts. And as I said, it's only the third or fourth time that any map has been redrawn voluntarily by a legislature anywhere in the country in the last 50 years. So, you know, there's the law, and then there's norms, you know, the idea that we should set up a playing field and leave it alone for 10 years.
Well, let's stay with this idea of whether we can redraw lines in the middle of a decade or even late in a decade. Eddie, I think your argument, or at least one common argument on your side of the ledger, is that there's nothing in the Missouri Constitution that says you can't redraw the lines at any point going forward. Am I right about that? And how do you see this question?
Yeah, that's right. And we have to step back, you know, and the key point here is, how do we read a constitution and where does a legislature get its power? Because there are different types of power that a state legislature exercises. And one question is, why is the state legislature drawing districts at all? Not every state actually does that for congressional districts. Well, we actually start with the U.S. Constitution. So the U.S. Constitution is what actually gives the authority, not just to states, but to state legislatures to draw the districts. So when state legislatures are acting in drawing districts, they're not merely exercising a power, a sovereign power of the state. They're actually exercising a federally delegated power. So we start with that principle. Then the question is, okay, but they also are exercising a sovereign power. That is one of the most important sovereign powers any state legislature has, which is how to organize the political system, the body politic. And this is an area in which the state legislature's powers are at its apex. Okay, in other words, unless the Constitution of the state says you can't do something, then you can. Their power does not depend on a specific phrase in the Constitution giving them that power. If it did, if they were going to sit there lifeless, unless the Constitution told them to go do something specifically and go do that thing, then this argument would make a little more sense. But the background is that they have plenary power to district or do whatever else that they want to do, subject to limitations in the Constitution. I wouldn't go this far, but I would say there are related arguments. Sometimes even a state constitution can actually have limitations on the state legislative power that violates a broad delegation from the U.S. Constitution. We don't have to go into all that, but just to give you an example, I mean, this is an area where this federally delegated power and state sovereign power come together. And I know I went too long there, but I'm sure you'll cut that out of the other broadcast. But the point is,
all your stuff's going in.
That's all going in. Okay. Well, I think I went too long, but the point is that power's there. There's no such thing as implied limitations on a state's power. The Pearson v. Koster case didn't deal with that issue. It did deal with compactness, which is something else we could get into.
Let me ask Savannah, our Missouri government reporter, this notion that Missouri redistricted this late in the decade is unusual. Everyone can agree to that. How did lawmakers wrestle with this? And did even some Republicans express some hesitancy about diving into redistricting in 2025?
Yeah, so one Republican legislator that I spoke to, Republican Bill Allen in the Northland, he's in District 17. He's in a pretty split House district himself for the Missouri House. It's about 50-50, Republican and Democrat. And he said he's never heard more from his constituents in his 3 years in the legislature than about this issue. And overwhelmingly from both sides of the aisle, that his constituents did not want to they didn't want him to support redistricting. What's interesting about Bill Allen's district is that his House district up near Clay Como is actually split already between the 5th and the 6th district. I think Mr. Grimes brought this up earlier that part of the Northland is in the 6th district. And so even though this single House seat in Missouri would have stood to benefit from redistricting because they would have been more compact, they would have all been in the 6th district, his constituents did not want him to vote for it. So he was one of the 15 Republicans, 13 in the House that voted against redistricting. The Speaker of the House, John Patterson, was another example who, although he allowed redistricting to go through, he moved along a special session, he said that he, as a person who represents Lee Summit over in eastern Jackson County, could not support a map that split Jackson County like it did. And so there were examples of that, especially in areas, almost all of the Republicans that voted against it were in areas that were either targeted by redistricting or would be moved into new districts or touched by the new districts in some way. And on the other side of it, though, are Republicans who really support this, who say that, Missouri has Republican representatives in all levels of the state. All of the top state offices are held by Republicans. And so that it makes more sense to have our congressional delegation represent that as well and be more Republican. There is a representative I spoke to, Michael Davis, down in the Belton area, who said that, his district is Republican. Missouri is overwhelmingly Republican, or at least votes overwhelmingly Republican for those state offices. And so it makes sense to continue on that path with the congressional delegation. I will say Davis was one who supported redistricting back in 2022 as well.
Zane, what are you hearing in Kansas? I mean, clearly there's some reticence based on the fact that we don't have a special session called yet. What are lawmakers telling you?
Yeah, there's one state lawmaker. Well, I've spoken with several state lawmakers on either side of this who support, who don't support redistricting right now. I think that's the key for some of them, is that they don't support the mid-decade redistricting. They think it should be based on the census. The proponents that I've spoken with, including leadership in the state House and Senate, say that Democratic states, Democratic-led states are doing it too. So we need to do it, is one of the arguments. They say that they want all of the representatives to, quote, represent Kansas. And that just means they don't want to see Sharice Davids in the 3rd district anymore. They tried to redraw the districts in 2022 to accomplish that feat. It did not work, although it did change the map pretty significantly. So this time around, if they're going to challenge Davids in her seat, they're going to have to split Johnson County up. In from what I've heard, speaking with political scientists and even lawmakers who support it, it seems clear that that's their goal. It's a county of over 600,000 people. As Eddie said, it's 750,000 is the ideal district size for the U.S. House. So in 2032, it's very likely it would have happened, and I bet some of the detractors right now would support it then in 7 years. But right now, I think there's just reticence from a number of those state lawmakers.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Up to Date on KCUR 89.3. We're coming to you from the Kansas City Public Library, where we're hosting a forum on redistricting, an issue that's confronting both Kansas and Missouri right now. I want to get some questions from audience members in just like 10 seconds. First, I want to ask Ed Greim, could the U.S. Supreme Court, I mean, a lot of people are looking at this saying this is kind of madness right now. Everyone's going through redistricting, a redistricting frenzy. Could the U.S. Supreme Court put a stop to this somehow?
No. Congress could put a stop to this because along with that delegation to state legislatures is a congressional override that the founders wanted in there because they weren't totally sure they could trust the states to actually hold elections and send representatives to Congress. So the back end is that Congress could actually pass a law that would impose all kinds of requirements. But the Constitution itself does not control here. And so the U.S. Supreme Court couldn't step in on the mid-decade issue.
Okay, let's go to some questions from audience members. I'm looking for, Peggy Lowe from KCUR, one of our investigative reporters. Peggy.
One of the members of our audience, Steve, wants to know, and I know we only have an hour here, but how does race affect gerrymandering? Race.
Dr. Wang, do you want to weigh in there?
Well, this is a moving target, and as you say, that we have limited time. In the 1960s was a historic piece of legislation called the Voting Rights Act that established ways of protecting racial groups that have historically been not represented very fairly. And that was passed at the time but with bipartisan majorities. And then it was renewed in the early 80s, and I believe that Ronald Reagan signed the renewal of the Voting Rights Act. And so for a long time, there was a consensus that race could be governed under the Voting Rights Act. And there are different gradations of that are complicated and intricate. Like if you can draw a district that's majority Black or Hispanic, then you must. In some parts of the United States, there are some circuits that say that you should draw coalition districts, so if different racial groups can get together and form a voting majority, then they should. All this is the existing law, and it's one of the very few protections for fairness in districting. The Supreme Court declined to get involved in partisan gerrymandering, which is what we're seeing this year, in a case called Rucho versus Common Cause. They could have intervened and put a stop to what's happening now, but they chose to step back from that.
I think that's what I was driving at before. There was a case.
Rucho versus Common Cause. And now I think there's a pretty lively case right now that could change a lot of what I'm saying. So there's a thing called Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and Ed is right at the center of that case. And there's a possibility that some of the protections under the Voting Rights Act will go away if Ed's side wins in the Supreme Court this year.
I'd like to respond to that.
Please.
Well, so the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was targeted at that time to literacy tests and poll taxes, just a range of legislation that mainly southern states were passing, which kept Black registration extremely low in the South. I mean, there were just massive. The statistics are mind-blowing. They're just basically, Blacks weren't able to vote. And every time the Justice Department would bring a lawsuit and would win, the state would just tweak the law a little bit and would always stay one step ahead. So that's what led to the Voting Rights Act. Over time, and so around the same time that was passed, lawsuits were brought directly under the 14th and 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Those are the provisions which require equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Under the 15th Amendment, that's one of the 3 Civil War amendments, it says you cannot discriminate in voting on the basis of race. Okay, and so the 15th Amendment directly prohibits racial discrimination. So plaintiffs were bringing lawsuits against things like gerrymandered districts, even before the Voting Rights Act and after it was passed, and they were winning. And courts would order redistricting if lines were being, drawn to disenfranchise any minority. It could be blacks, whites, or Hispanics. So this is a little bit of a long answer, but I think I have to correct this point. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, okay, what do you have to prove in bringing this type of a claim? And they explained that you've got to show intentional discrimination. In other words, there's no such thing as a claim that because the black population is 27%, a voting age population, you have to have that percentage of the seats. Okay, there is no principle like that in the Constitution. Okay, and so the court said you've got to show intent. It's not just enough that as a result of the districts that the percentages don't line up. So Congress responded by amending the Voting Rights Act in 1982, and that was the first time. That's what I've challenged, is the amendment. The amendment said it's enough to just show effects. You don't have to show intentional discrimination. So it went beyond the 15th Amendment. And at the time, the argument was, well, it's hard to prove intent sometimes, but if we can just prove the effects, then we're going to capture discrimination out there. And if we go a little too far every now and then, no problem. Well, there was a problem. And so that's what led to the actual cause of action called racial gerrymandering. That is under the case of Shaw v. Reno. So Shaw versus Reno actually blocks states from relying on things like the Voting Rights Act to intentionally draw districts that stereotype voters based on race. And so the pending case right now is not to get rid of the Voting Rights Act. The pending case is to say that you can't rely on this effects test in the Voting Rights Act to intentionally move voters around from district to district based solely on their, or based predominantly on their race. So that's what the case is.
So Ed, if I'm tracking right, and I may not be, but if I'm tracking right, there are some residents in Kansas City right now who are saying, hey, I'm being discriminated against. I'm a person of color. My congressional representative is Emanuel Cleaver, a man of color. And now I'm going to be represented probably by a white representative. And so I'm being discriminated against. Does that case hold water based on what you just said? Because if I understood you right, you're saying it does not.
Well, you'd have to have more facts. Okay, so under the Voting Rights Act, by the way, that the part that I'm challenging, that doesn't state a claim, because there, at least at the congressional level, we don't have a high enough black voting age population in this area to meet the test for bringing a Voting Rights Act claim. But that doesn't mean that you're out of luck, because you could bring a claim saying that the people who drew this map did it based predominantly on race. That's option one. That's a Shaw v. Reno claim. Now, interestingly, none of the lawsuits, and these are lawsuits that are either brought by the NAACP or brought in coordination with them, they're not bringing those claims, okay? And the reason is, I mean, they're if there's an expert in this area, it's them. And they realize there's not evidence of that. But they see this as a partisan gerrymander, and actually it does not violate the Constitution to bring a partisan gerrymander. So your hypothetical, if you went a step further and said, and the people drawing the maps looked at race and moved people around based on race, then you've got a 14th Amendment Shaw v. Reno claim. But they're not bringing it.
I will say, in terms of voter effects, a lot of voters I've talked to, especially those who live along Truce Avenue, which is a historical racial dividing line in Kansas City, feel very targeted by the map and say, like the fact that the legislature chose to split these districts down a historical segregation line, feels targeted. Whether or not there's a claim, the KCUR actually did a really good report on this in the past couple of days that analyzed the districts and saw that the 5th district would lose more than 70,000 minority residents. A lot of them would go into the 6th and then more into the 4th, obviously. But so in terms of legality, that's not my expertise, but in terms of what's happening on the ground in Kansas City, a lot of voters feel like it's just segregating the city all over again. And then in terms of effects within city governance, makes it a lot harder to sort of coordinate federal aid, and they're worried that they would see a sort of uneven bureaucratic response to Kansas City based on those historic dividing lines.
As of today, have there been any lawsuits filed in Missouri on this idea of people feeling discriminated against? I don't believe so, but
Racially, no. So it is
Racially, no.
that political mid-decade fight that they're targeting. So
Dr.
sorry
Wang?
about that.
Well, I was just going to say that I think this discussion just goes to show that the law concerning race and fairness in districting has gotten quite entangled. And as pointed out, the Supreme Court has stepped back from claims of partisan gerrymandering. So the current stance of the Supreme Court is that partisan gerrymandering is constitutional. We live in a funny time when it's becoming a little bit less clear that the Supreme Court is the correct arbiter of what is constitutional. And so, but I think one complication that's really clear from discussions of race and partisanship is that maybe what's needed is a new Voting Rights Act. That all these things that are left to the devices of Supreme Court justices doing their best or doing whatever they do to read principles into the 14th, 15th Amendments and the Voting Rights Act, that's a lot of burden to put on federal courts and to put on the Supreme Court. And if we were to have a new Voting Rights Act, a lot of these things could be laid out in statute and made clear and settled. And so we're in this funny time in voting rights when there was an order that seemed to be pretty stable through the 80s and 90s. It's been, weakening in the last 10, 15 years or so. And now what we're left with is something that kind of resembles maybe what came before the Voting Rights Act. And so I think, this is obviously an extremely difficult time for US democracy, but one could imagine a future in which this law gets straightened out in ways that lay out clearly without getting into, difficult things like, look, I'm a science guy. Like I try to read Shaw versus Reno, and my eyes cross a little bit, and Jingles criteria, and there's all this stuff that I pray that we won't get into tonight.
Well, I do have a hard time grappling with the idea that Congress would take something like this on right now.
Not right now.
Not right now. Yeah. Taylor.
Hi, I have a question from an audience member. Has redistricting ever happened before under the pressure of a president trying to hold on to power?
Redistricting often is at the, under partisan pressure. I'll give you an extreme example. After the Civil War, there was this version of gerrymandering that occurred that affected how many senators there were representing a particular part of the United States. We normally don't think about gerrymandering as being something that affects the Senate, but there is a reason why we have 2 Dakotas, right? There's not that many people in North and South Dakota, and no offense to the fine people of North and South Dakota, but the reason we have 2 Dakotas is in order to have 4 senators of the same party in the US Senate. And so, yeah, these things can absolutely be political. This is why Alaska and Hawaii got admitted at the same time. This is just a constant. It was more severe during, as I said, the first Gilded Age in the 19th century. In this century, less so. Extreme gerrymanders have been actually relatively rare in the last 50 years. But it's an innovative time we live in.
Jody Fertino from KCUR.
I have a question from an audience member. What criteria would be used to create ideal districts? And tagging on another audience member's thoughts is that the Electoral College used geography to define like interests. Is it time to use wealth or economic interests to define like interest?
There's different ways to define fairness. I think you probably have pretty well-defined views on that.
Well, I mean, honestly, this is left to state legislatures. There's a mix of criteria. Nobody can really agree on what a community of interest is. We were litigating in Louisiana, and we were trying to show that there was a racial gerrymander by connecting Baton Rouge to Shreveport and winding, all the way up. And we said, well, there's nothing similar. So I said, well, part of this is the Red River community of interest. And then someone said, well, they use similar types of gravy and their food. And so everybody had these cultural factors. So at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of this, like the Constitution can't cover a lot of this. It's got to be left to the legislature because they're inherently political decisions. Now, the question might have gone a lot further and suggested maybe apportioning legislatures based on class or wealth or things like that. I think, candidly, I believe that is completely contrary to the design of our Constitution and our country. But I suppose a constitutional amendment could change that.
There's another way to do it, which is independent commissions, which have worked in Michigan, Colorado, Arizona, California. And empirically, I have presumed to write an actual law article, which is kind of an odd thing for a scientist to do. But I wrote this extremely long article looking into which states ended up enacting legislative and congressional delegations that most closely reflected the political makeup of the people and created the most competition. And although we could have an argument about whether it would fit within the Constitution, independent citizen commissions actually represent the kind of, whatever, culture versus gravy or what have you, compromise that, and so this is, Democrats, independents, and Republicans all sitting in a room together. Empirically, I don't want to get into whether it's good law or not, but empirically that has turned out to create representation that is surprisingly good at representing all the different constituencies of a state.
Ed Greim, do you agree with that based on what you know about the impact of independent commissions? Because they sound really attractive.
They do, yeah. Yeah, they do sound attractive. I mean, the problem is at the end of the day, I mean, there's a host of issues and all the political games just kind of move to a different stage. So, how do they get appointed? What's the membership of the commissions?
But they're not politicians.
Well, they're not politicians, but they don't go into a jury room, and they're not sequestered. I mean, so now I will say, like in New York, arguably, their alternative system kept the controlling party there from enacting the gerrymander that it wanted. California was the same thing, although they're about to do away with that through an initiative so that they can add more Democratic seats. So, I mean, they do weed out the extremes. They probably do that. But at the end of the day, they're still reliant on experts who, have their own agendas as well. And I mean, there's no such thing as a wise, completely nonpartisan citizen who will put all personal interests aside. I mean, I don't believe that's the design of our country. And so I have a healthy skepticism of commissions.
I was going to say, Zane and Savannah, have you heard any conversation in the states you cover about this idea of independent redistricting commissions?
I've heard from constituents that say that they like the idea of that.
How about lawmakers?
Well, so the current system is the state legislatures draw the maps for the federal lawmakers, right? And that's supposed to be one step removed from, the fox watching the hen house. Right now, what Republican State Senate President Ty Masterson told me is his body's not drawing the map either. He said it's going to be under the purview of the federal delegation, which means, well, he didn't say that. He said the majority of the US House members, which is 3 Republicans versus the 1 Democrat. So it is the House members overseeing the drawing of their own districts. I imagine part of that is to avoid a dummy mander where you accidentally reshape it so much that you actually put a disadvantage for your own party in a different area by accident. But it also seems to me that, we are far away from an independent commission model when it's some national group that nobody has told me what it is, that is drawing these maps in multiple different state legislatures, as opposed to the state legislature doing it themselves.
Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know from just covering politics in Missouri for a long time that the chiefs of staff to lots of members of Congress in Missouri have been known to get together in a room and draw these maps and work it out before it ever goes before state lawmakers.
Actually, that may have been true some years ago, but they don't. I mean, things have changed now, and I think both parties have gotten smarter. The incumbents, the existing delegation, absolutely weighs in. I mean, with a few exceptions. Sometimes one member of Congress can get on someone's nerves, and they'll force that person out. They'll district them out. But otherwise, they are going to sign off. It's not quite as that might have been true in 1990 or maybe even 2000, but at least in the last
2010.
It hasn't happened for a couple of cycles.
Savannah, you hearing any talk in Missouri about independent commissions?
Also from constituents. I was at the Capitol when the people came to protest redistricting during a special session. A lot of people there said that they would prefer an independent commission or some other thing that sort of kept it out of the hands of the legislature. Although that is I guess a partially skewed pool because these people were against the mid-decade redistricting. In terms of lawmakers, I've not heard from any of them that want that.
I want to go back to another question here. For a lot of folks who are troubled by what they're seeing, Dr. Wang, you get a sense that that what we might see going forward is a case over this question of can you redistrict mid-decade or not? Just clarify this for me. Have there been cases that have settled that law, or are we going to see a federal court judge rule on this, and that's going to become the standard, the law of the land going forward? How's this going to play out?
Well, the one blessing of our current system in our current political time is that 50 states have 50 different sets of laws. One thing that it does is it creates this difficulty of figuring out what the law is. So this is where the biologist in me comes in handy. So people working with me have a love of detail. And there are several dozen states where the Constitution or statute specifically forbid mid-decade redistricting. There are other states, like Texas has nothing at all in their state constitution about redistricting, so they can do any old thing they want, and they do. And so the law is quite variable. Similarly, only half the states even allow citizens to bring an initiative, and so in half the states, the legislature has to agree to establishing a commission and giving away their own power. And of course, as we've just determined, that's kind of rough. So I think it could be done by congressional act, but it is currently highly variable.
But what I'm hearing, Ed Greim, is federal laws, federal judges aren't going to have any clout here.
No, and the thing is, there's so much litigation also, like Texas, they're constantly in litigation. And so if we could actually devise a rule, I think I'd want to give the legislature flexibility, because sometimes they need to do that to stop litigation. I mean, if they're going to be constantly sued on the maps, I think you want to give them the power to come in and change it if they need to. But we don't have that federal standard. We won't have that decision.
Vanna?
I was just telling you 7.
Okay, sounds good. If you're just joining us, again, you're listening to Up to Date on KCUR 89.3. We're coming to you live from the Kansas City Public Library with a forum on redistricting, an issue obviously at the forefront of many of our listeners' minds. I'm going to go back to some questions from the audience here. Taylor, I think you've got one.
Yeah, I actually have a couple on the same topic. These are around the petition in Missouri to overturn the redistricting initiative. And there's a question about whether the signatures that were gathered before the Secretary of State certified the petition will be thrown out. Do you think that there's any chance that it will actually be reversed based on that petition?
Ed, can you throw those signatures out, or do you have any read on that?
You know what? I think that one could go either way. I mean, they have to gather a lot of signatures. I think they're more likely just to fail by not gathering sufficient signatures in 2/3 of our districts. I don't think that issue will decide it. I mean, under a strict reading of the law, they did have to wait. They couldn't gather early. But our courts here have tended to, at least on certain types of measures, have tended to read the rules very broadly.
On the initiative or on the petition to overturn redistricting, the group People Not Politicians, which I saw a couple people gathering signatures in the library today, has said that they've gathered over 150,000 signatures so far. So like Ed said, to get this sort of thing on the ballot, you need a little over 106,000 signatures with a certain amount in each congressional district. So whether or not they have the amounts needed in each district, we'll see. In terms of if the signatures that were there would count before, the ones that were filed before the Secretary of State and the Attorney General sort of are challenging that and changing the date, that will have to be decided in the courts, because the group that is gathering these signatures, People Not Politicians, is very confident that they will count and says they will challenge this and to make them all count. But the Secretary of State and the Attorney General have opposing views on that. So that's sort of what we'll have to see. In the meantime, People Not Politicians, it says they're going to continue to gather signatures and are feeling somewhat confident that they'll be able to achieve that number regardless of.
And early on, that was seen as almost a hill too high, but there's more confidence that can get done now.
Yeah, so the signature gathering itself has to be contained to 90 days. Where that start date was is what's being contested right now. But a lot of people I talked to said, like the last time this happened was with right to work in 2016, 2017. That was a very unpopular measure, it proved to be, with voters. And so the signatures were gathered easy, but it was also earlier in the year. It was warmer. People were outside more. And so a lot of people I spoke to said maybe they can't even gather the signatures this time, or, it's happened so fast, people maybe don't know what's going on, and that it's getting colder. And so it's going to be harder to gather signatures in the fall and winter time. That could prove true, but voters that I've spoken to, signature gatherers that I've spoken to, have said that has not deterred turnout with with petition signers, and that even though the special session happened fast and the legislature passed the map really fast, people are more tuned in than ever on districting.
Now, I want to step back a few steps and ask a basic question here that maybe has gotten lost in this conversation a little bit. This question comes from a Kansas City, Missouri resident who wondered about the legal challenges to redistricting over time. And this resident asked, I thought I recall from my high school civics class that gerrymandering was illegal. Do I remember that correctly? And if so, when and why did it change? Ed, help.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've been. I mean, the thing is, there was some question for several decades about whether political or partisan gerrymandering was lawful or not, and whether it can be adjudicated in court. Now we know the answer is that it can't be adjudicated in court, and that partisan purposes are permissible. Racial gerrymandering has always been a violation of the 14th and the 15th Amendments, always. And it continues to be. And not just racial gerrymandering, but also things that we might colloquially call them that, but it's vote dilution. So usually if you're diluting votes, you're also gerrymandering, but you're cracking and packing groups of Black voters or any minority voters intentionally. That's also a violation. So you learn correctly, and that is still true.
I think one of the difficulties is that there are all kinds of reasons for drawing a single district, and many of those have been permissible. But as data analytics have gotten more sophisticated, and as we as voters have become more reliable in how we vote, it's become easier and easier to manipulate this particular step in our democracy to change what it means to be represented. And so in some ways, the law is currently becoming more flexible at a time when the people who commit these deeds have become more able. And so it's a tension point in representation.
But I would add that plaintiffs and their experts have also become much more able as well. And they've been able to at least convince some district courts that don't get reviewed that what the court, what was definitely Republicans just trying to win or Democrats just trying to win was actually a racial gerrymander. And so, I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of redistricting experts who get hired in different cases to come in and do this. They just go from state to state and wait for people like me to hire them. But I mean, it's not mutually assured destruction, but the level of expertise has gone up across the board.
KCUR's Peggy Lowe has another question from the audience.
So we have a couple audience members who are thinking the same thing. Why did Missouri Governor Kehoe stop at Kansas City, leaving the only other Democratic seat in St. Louis alone? Or a second audience member said more succinctly, why pick on Kansas City and not St. Louis?
It's technically very hard to deprive St. Louis of its one Democratic member. If you look at the number of people in Greater St. Louis, and also if you look at the size of the Black community in St. Louis, there's basically current interpretation of racial fairness and districting would invite a lawsuit if they had done that. And secondly, just technically, it would have been very hard. I mean, I would say that as the seatbelts come off, it is true that people, when presented with 2 cookies on the table, will often take both cookies. But that second cookie was kind of nailed down.
Well, right, and they don't want to take both cookies actually, because you might get sick from the second one, but maybe you don't like peanut butter. But it's because then you water down your majority so much that in a bad year you could suddenly lose several seats because you went too far. You over maximized. And there's the issue of the larger Black population in St. Louis. I mean, if they were ever going to get to a 7-1 map, it would have to have been Kansas City.
We have a question here again from an audience member. What are some of the immediate impacts, Savannah, on Kansas City and Jackson County if the new redistricting map goes into effect?
I think the most immediate impact would be that the district you vote in for the midterm elections would change, and so that would impact who's running. A lot of candidates who, it was already kind of extraordinary that there were multiple primary challengers for Emanuel Cleaver for the 5th district in this election. If the new map goes through, those challengers would be then moved to different districts, or one of them would be, and so who's running in each district would certainly change. It kind of somewhat opens the field to run for the 5th district, to challenge Cleaver, and tens of thousands of voters in Kansas City would suddenly find themselves voting for a different incumbent.
And we've also been asked to clarify a point you made earlier. Is there a time limit in Kansas? Is the clock ticking that they have to get this done by date certain?
All I know for certain is that they set their target date as November 7th. They would also have to, pause that special session for, enough time to where Governor Kelly would obviously veto it, and then they'd come back and try to override that veto. As far as I know, there's not, something in Kansas statute that says you must, gather these special session petition signatures X days before it actually happens. This would only be the second time in state history that state legislators have called them back to the state house outside of a regular session. You've got, going back centuries, like it used to be special sessions were for outbreaks of foot and mouth disease or something. And now it's, in 2021, again, Senator Masterson brought them back over COVID restrictions. And now he's trying to rally the same level of support for redistricting, although he is trying to sweeten the pot with some other items on the agenda for a prospective special session as well. So I think that's kind of a way to encourage the holdouts. But again, they do not have the votes in the state house yet. And it's my understanding that they're still trying to squeeze them out before the special session.
KCUR's Jody Fortino.
How will the needs of neighborhoods east of Troost with high poverty, transit dependency, and health burdens be prioritized in a district whose dominant geography is rural with competing priorities?
Well, there's 2 things going on there. I take it that's the eastern part of Kansas City? Yeah, all right, sorry, I apologize, I'm just visiting. So one thing is, it is certainly odd to have the largest city in Missouri be kind of unrepresented in Congress, irrespective of what one feels about this. That is a peculiar situation. So these communities will have to throw in common cause, the eastern part of the city with Jefferson City, the western part of the city, the little finger that we're in now with Lebanon. But another is that, just to remind people, in our federalist system, there are multiple levels of government. And so there are more representatives in the state legislature in Missouri than there are in Congress. And so one challenge right now is it's going to be tougher in the federal government because of Kansas City not having a representative. But then the other alternative is to be represented in the state capitol or even in your local community. And this is not an entirely satisfactory answer, but I think we have to remember as citizens that we have multiple ways in which we can be heard. And those are the cards that we are dealt.
Taylor?
Is Mr. Greim involved in the current redistricting proposal? If so, what is his role?
No, I'm not. I'm watching it.
Peggy Lowe?
We have an audience member who wants to know, should we just switch to multi-member districts and single transferable vote?
Oh, someone close to my heart. I want to buy that person a drink. So the challenge there, so there are other rules that are used in other countries that can lead to proportional representation. They have advantages like doing away with a lot of gerrymandering offenses. They tend to let more parties flourish. And so if you don't like being stuck with one major party, countries that have that often have many parties. Like in the Netherlands, there's a super interesting election that happened yesterday that basically displaced the far right. And that was a super interesting event. One of the challenges with such a system is that congressional statute currently mandates single-member districts. And any change to transferable vote or proportional representation probably should be done uniformly. Otherwise, it becomes unfair to a particular state or a particular constituency. It's something that could be tried at a state legislative level. For instance, like in my private little, risk game that I play in my head, I think it'd be cool for a small state like Vermont to try out STV because, as Justice Brennan, I believe, said, the states are the laboratories of democracy. And we are at a time when it might be possible to experiment. I mean, the first Gilded Age led to the Progressive Era and led to popular election of senators, led to women getting the vote. After a long time, the Civil Rights Era. And so, I don't know, it's an interesting proposal, and maybe we'll get a chance at that if we can survive the current time we're in.
Ed, I think for a lot of people watching this whole debate, it feels like the parties are cheating. The system is being cheated, and whether or not where this winds up legally, can you step back just for a moment and think about what all of this has, what kind of corrosive effect all of this has on American democracy, or does it have a corrosive effect?
Well, I guess I've never had to put on my political scientist hat here, but I think we're almost at the, and maybe a political scientist could correct me here. I think we're almost at the point where we have, especially if California goes ahead with its gerrymander and the Democrat states continue on, we will have gerrymandered about as far as we can go. I mean, we're almost getting to a quasi-electoral college type system for Congress, where the party that controls that state, they just send whatever their number is to Washington. I mean, maybe we need to live in that system for a little while to see what it's like, and for voters to say, I don't like this. I'm one of the 37% of Massachusetts citizens who are Republicans, and we have 0 of 9. Does that begin to get bad in Massachusetts, or do people just get up and leave and vote with their feet?
Or the 37% of people in Oklahoma who vote Democratic and have no representation.
Well, or the 40% in California who are going to have 4 out of 52 seats. I mean, it goes both ways. And I don't, arguably the Voting Rights Act had been used about as far as it could to create majority minority districts. The same may be about ready to happen with political gerrymandering as well. But I guess I don't have an answer for how to get around it. Maybe we've gone as far as we can go. Both parties have used this tool as far as we can. Now let's live and see how we like it in Missouri or California or where else.
Dr. Wang, what do you say to that question?
I mean, this is a really tough time. Starting about 30 years ago, there's sort of a style of smash mouth politics that has taken hold at the national level. The two parties have gotten farther and farther apart. There's less, motive to cooperate. I mean, at some level, these crimes against democracy take means, motive, and opportunity. And the motive is there. The opportunity is certainly being exploited. The means is here. So I think one extreme challenge is finding a way out of the situation we're in here as a nation right now. And I hold out hope that that state and local action can in some way help. I mean, ultimately, these powers, we can talk about legislatures, we can talk about congressional actions and the Supreme Court, but people like John Locke said that the ultimate source of authority in a democracy is the people. And that is an extreme challenge because we have all these rules that turn the authority of the people into representation. And, I guess if things get rough enough, then maybe it's time for us as a society to take a good hard look at those rules.
Let's grab one or two more questions from the audience. Yeah, Taylor.
I've gotten a couple of questions about AI. Is there an opportunity to use AI to possibly solve any of this? Does it play a role in gerrymandering?
Mostly for bad. So there are algorithms, so bad and good. So this is already in use by experts in courts. So for the bad, it's possible to use the power of data to draw millions of maps. I mean, my team can do this at the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. We can draw 1 million maps in a few hours. And so we use that for good to look for ways to find out whether a map is an outlier. And so in court cases, that can sometimes be useful. But with machine learning and AI, we can also start to do a better and better job of categorizing how people will vote. And so if I find out that you subscribe to guns and ammo, if I find out that you drive a big old truck, if I find out that, what kind of sticker you have in your car, I have a lot of information about how you're likely to vote. And that kind of analytics, right, all the data that we give up in the form of our credit reports and our shopping habits and so on, you can feed that into a machine learning network and really get a good beat on how people are going to vote. So AI is actually tough because it's basically this very souped up technology that unregulated can basically lead us to be manipulated in ways that we don't even know about. It can also be a tool for great good. And so I think it's like any tool, it's in the hands of the person who wields it.
Jody.
From an audience member, will Kansasans have an opportunity for a referendum to vote on any redistricting that might pass during special session?
Zane?
We don't even have publicly available maps. So I don't know is the quick answer legally if that would be a path forward. I know that Sharice Davids, the only Democrat representing Kansas in Congress, has indicated she would sue against a map that she would view as unfair. And I would bet you some other organizations would also bring legal challenges. But as far as like a ballot question or something, I don't know.
If these new maps stick, Savannah and Zane, how will voters find out who their elected, what district they're in terms of their member of Congress? What obligation does the state have to provide that information to voters?
So a lot of the information you'll find out from your election board, similar to the cards that they send out to tell you, to notify you for an election and what precinct you're voting in, things like that. There's also websites within the election board that will tell you every single elected official you can vote on, every single district, but also just other websites online that'll tell you, kind of compare the map to your address and things like that.
Okay. Well, we want to thank our distinguished guests, Edward Greim of Graves, Garrett, and Greim Attorneys at Law, Dr. Samuel Wang of Princeton's Neuroscience Department and the Gerrymandering Project. Thanks also to Savannah Hawley Bates and Zane Irwin of KCUR. Give them a nice round of applause for their time here tonight. And I want to thank our partners as well, the Kansas City Public Library and KCUR's own Jen Listen Young Friends Group. Thank you also to the KCUR staff and volunteers who are helping make this program possible. This has been a special edition of KCUR's Up to Date from the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Steve Kraske. You've been listening to Up to Date on KCUR 89.3. We'll talk again tomorrow. Thank you all very much.